A listener named Graham asked, would you consider adding a segment to the show in which you answer some of the most common or interesting listener and client questions you've received recently? And as your co-hosts thought about it, we said, why not give it a try? Except in our usual go overboard fashion, we decided that rather than trying it just as a segment, we'd make it an entire episode. And rather than answering just 5, we'd answer 9, with 3 from each of your co-hosts, and without sharing with one another in advance what those 3 questions would be. So you be the judge if this approach is something you'd like us to continue from time to time, and if so, send in your questions. The questions we tackle today range pretty widely. What's the best way to pull from your retirement accounts when you're retired? What's the role of cash in your portfolios? What are some of the drawbacks to the 10-year withdrawal rules for inherited IRAs? How should you think about Roth conversions? Why own bonds when they pay so little? Should you refinance your home with rates this low even if you did so recently? Should you prioritize reducing debt or investing for growth? And does it matter what kind of debt? What if I have a complicated family situation and I want to bless my kids and grandkids, but not set them up for fights after I'm gone, and not risk that problematic son or daughter-in-law abusing the inheritance I left for my kids? Also, how reliable are the answers my financial planner is giving me about whether I have too little, too much, or the right kind of life insurance? As a fair warning, for the first 5 minutes or so, we got pretty deep into a discussion of the NBA Finals and the Milwaukee Bucks, as well as the extra cool look Adrian sported for our YouTube audience as a tribute to Roshan and his birthday. So if that's not your cup of tea, maybe skip forward until we get into our first questions. Also, if you've wondered how bad my singing voice is, listen to the end to find out. In fact, stay tuned for all that and more right now on the Retirement Lifestyle Show.
Welcome to the Retirement Lifestyle Show. I'm your co-host, Roshan Loungani, here as always with Adrian Nicholson and Erik Olson. We've got a great topic for you today that we have to thank one of our listeners for giving to us. So, Erik, tell us about that. What's the listener's name? And if you can go into the topic and we can all talk about why we think this is relevant and important to everyone.
All right. Well, shout out to Graham for during our most recent client meeting saying, hey, I have a little feedback about your podcast, and I think it'd be useful if you just let off with answers to a few client questions. So today what we just decided we'd do is rather than having it just be a short segment that precedes the main body of our podcast, we just go ahead and deal with 3 questions each that the 3 of us co-hosts have encountered over the recent days or weeks and that we thought would have more generalizable appeal to the larger share of our audience. So again, Graham, thanks again.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. We struggle with keeping things short. So we didn't think we could do a short segment.
Yep. Shout out to Graham. I'm very excited for this. This is going to be a cool podcast, and that's why I have my sunglasses on. It's going to be a cool one.
For our Adrian was out partying with Giannis last night, so he needs his sunglasses on.
I mean,
after the Bucks won the championship.
You're pretty close, Roshan. I mean, Erik, you'll be excited to hear about this. I went to my first baseball game of the year.
Oh, dude, nice.
Oh, did you?
Yep.
Who played it was the Nationals. Who
they played? The Marlins, and it was a really exciting game. Honestly, the Nats were up 2-0 going into the second inning. Then the Marlins were up to bat, and they hit a home run. And then it was 3-2. The Marlins were up. It literally sucked the whole life out of the stadium. And then when the Nats were up to bat again, they scored 3 runs and they just held on to the lead. It was such a good atmosphere. It was just so good being out there. I was a little bummed. A ball was coming in my direction, but a 12-year-old kind of snagged it from me. So that kind of bummed me out. But overall, it was such a good time. But I know our buddy Jill won't be happy with all the food and drinks I was having last night too. So I definitely got to make up for that somehow this week. But drink a lot of water. That's what she said, and get my vitamin D. And then And then after the game, I went to another place to watch the end of the NBA championship, which was the last game of the season, man. What'd you think about that, Roshan?
I mean, Giannis earned it. He was incredible last night. Free throw. I think he only missed 2 free throws too. So I wanted a game 7, so I wanted the Suns to win real bad, but I'm not upset with how it went down. I can't fault the guy. He played his heart out.
Yeah.
And I saw today, I think it was only 6 players that actually scored on the Bucks team last night.
No kidding. That's incredible. I mean, it was such a good season. I was really happy with how it ended. But yeah, yesterday was a really solid game. And again, Erik, it felt so good to be out in a baseball game. It was a really nice night. It was exciting, man. What was the last baseball game you went to?
Gee, I think it had to have been spring training this year. So if you're talking about regular season, that's a different story. But I went out to Phoenix, and my buddy and his dad and another buddy of ours went out and saw opening day of spring training with the Padres playing the Mariners. And then the second day we came back and watched the Padres play the Cubs. So it was like you said, man, it's so fun to get out there and just be outdoors, honestly, and enjoying something so relaxing. But you have the look, Adrian. I'm telling you what, you are styling for those not watching on podcast. If you could see Adrian right now, you would say you just kind of you would feel cool by proximity, just being near.
I appreciate
Adrian
that.
right
This
now.
is my retirement outfit, but Roshan says I'm 25. I can't think of retirement or anything like that right now. But it's okay.
I'm picturing Adrian going from the baseball game someplace to watch the NBA Finals and then showing up to record the podcast directly from wherever he was yesterday.
Honestly, you're pretty close. I got home around like 2 a.m. So you pretty much hit it on the head, Roshan. I'm just feeling energized, like you said, Erik. It's just nice, being able to go out and just things are like opening back up. It's just really good. Like last week, I went to Topgolf with some of my friends, and then I went that night. I went to the club with some of my friends, and we haven't done that in like a year and a half. So I kind of felt like out of my shell a little bit with all these like people around, dancing, music going on. It was just a lot to take in. It's just it's all good. It's been a lot of fun.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's great.
And Roshan, I also got to say, tell me what you want for either lunch or dinner. It's on me because tomorrow's a very important day for you, right?
Yeah, tomorrow's my birthday, and thank you. And I will. I have no idea what I'm doing. I normally try to go to the beach, but I planned camp for the kids, so they can't leave. So they're ruining my birthday this year. So, but yes, I have no idea what I'm doing yet, but I've taken the day off to do something.
That's exciting. Well, wherever you want to eat today, it's on me. I definitely owe you one, and this is like a pre-happy birthday. And if anyone deserves a day off tomorrow, it's definitely you. The way your work ethic is, Roshan, you're just nonstop. Sometimes I feel like.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, and I'm definitely excited. Not quite sure for what yet, but just excited for it in general. So although this weekend I'll be celebrating. I'm going to Philadelphia and then going to a comedy show on Saturday. So got a birthday weekend celebration planned.
That's awesome.
All right. Well, Adrian, if you can help me remember at the end of this episode, we need to sing happy birthday to Roshan. So
yeah,
I hope you're a good singer because
we'll do like we'll pull one up on like YouTube and play that in the background or something. If we can do that. We'll have a celebrity sing Roshan his birthday song.
Yeah, is
fantastic.
it politically incorrect to say I want it to be the Stevie Wonder version because of Adrian's sunglasses? Is that okay?
Oh, that's okay.
That was actually the one I'm thinking of. Why is that like the most popular birthday song? Like that's the one coming to my mind, but I wasn't sure if it was Stevie Wonder's or not.
Yes, yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Let me get us back to the topic for today because we said we struggled to keep it short, and this is probably partly why. So 3 questions. If you don't mind, gentlemen, I'm going to kick us off. I've got 3 questions. Okay. They're not necessarily in order of importance, but I feel like I've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of weeks from people who are closer to retirement asking or we're planning how to access their money. So that the problem they're having is, and I'll give you an idea of some of the solutions, we can work that out together, but they've saved this money for retirement and now they're there and they don't know what to do about it in terms of where to go. So do either of you want to start us off with how you think this through, or how you'd answer it, where you would go, and we can get through this problem together? This is a complicated one.
Well, Adrian, you want to give it a shot, or would you like me to jump in?
You can start it off, Erik.
Okay, well, I guess it depends. So that's a great question, Roshan. And as a matter of fact, now that you say it, the clients that I was talking with, 2 clients I was talking with yesterday asked that very same question. So, but let's use the second case. I think of it as 2 parts. One is the strategy. The second is the mechanics. Okay. So let me start with the mechanics. On the mechanics, depending on how self-disciplined people are about adhering to a predefined plan, with a spending plan that will get them to the finish line without running out of their assets and having a high probability of doing that. But it's not their assets aren't so excessive that it's just an absolute no-brainer. There's nothing that could derail them. Many times from a mechanical standpoint, those clients appreciate when we go through the financial plan and we've sort of specified how much should be consumed for fixed expenses, for property taxes, for medical, for discretionary expenses, and so forth, that we calculate how much they're receiving from other guaranteed sources, such as Social Security and pension, and we measure the difference, and we send them that amount on a net basis, like a monthly paycheck that they used to have, so that just what they see in their spending account, their checking account, can help them self-regulate. So that's the mechanics side, is literally sending them a paycheck from their accounts on a monthly basis. The second part, the strategic part, is a little bit more involved, but I'll just simply say it's a recap of what we've talked about in previous episodes, where we do a deep analytical process with some very specialized software. We figure out, based on the unique composition of their assets, what the appropriate withdrawal strategy would be, and that dictates to us how much to take from each of the buckets, usually with, when I say each of the buckets, taxable, tax deferred, tax free, to arrive at an income tax, marginal income tax rate threshold that we don't want to violate. That's my answer. How would you answer it?
Taxes would have been the first thing I said, right? Planning it out. So, and when I was thinking about it, I actually almost took for granted the financial planning part and thought about how we do it strategically after. But Erik, you're completely right. The first thing I do is the same. We do a financial plan, figure out where their money's coming from. That will then help us give us an idea of what tax bracket they're in. And then we figure out strategically how much to take from those 3 tax buckets. Now, for our listeners that are not at the point yet where they're pulling money out for retirement and they're still saving for retirement, how you can use this information to your benefit is that plan your savings accordingly so you actually have money in these 3 buckets. The taxable being just a regular investment account. If you're looking at long-term capital gains, you've got favorable tax treatment there. The tax-free being most frequently the Roth IRA. There are other tax-free options, but that's the most frequent one. And then the tax-deferred, which will be taxable when you retire to you as ordinary income, are the 401ks and IRAs. And Erik, you mentioned the software, and we did an episode. I believe it was our last Battle of the Plans episode, where we looked at this software we use that talked about Roth conversions and where to take money out, and it plans this out strategically. I just mentioned that because I'm pretty frugal. Erik maybe a little bit more than me, but if he was paying for the software, I decided I needed to as well. But what really, so I've got the same software now because what I had existing didn't have it. But I found that about 60% of the time, it gives me the expected answer. But there is that 40%. And in general, it gives me more things to compare. So if you're just listening right now and you're saying, well, how do I do this? The obvious answer from us would be call us and we can help. Because the different scenarios it runs are very useful. But If you are doing this on your own, the first thing I'd say is while you're saving, try to get into all three areas so you've got flexibility. I always used to say to people, it gives you an ability, more of an ability to control your tax bracket and your tax situation versus having it dictated to you. Most people make X amount and that's what they pay taxes on. Well, in retirement, if you've saved correctly, you can manage that a little bit better to control your tax liability. And so for when you're taking it out, making sure more money comes to you versus taxes, at least as best as possible. And then second, when you're putting money in, make sure you get money into all three of these buckets to give you maximum flexibility.
Yeah, that's great. What a great start, Roshan. I mean, it shows how important it is to be strategic and be as efficient as possible when you're trying to receive that retirement paycheck. It shows how important it is to like plan and prepare for this so you can, just be as efficient as possible from a tax perspective. And it's just a really great, some really great points that you brought up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one I think applies to everyone, although the question came from people that are currently planning on taking their money out.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go to question number 2. Adrian, what do you got?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So I was talking to a buddy of mine. I was like, so what's like a common question you have, or what do you want us to like kind of talk about this episode? And he was like, okay, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is like, what's the purpose of cash? What's the role that cash will play in my overall financial picture and my portfolio? Is it worth just having, or should I invest it? Or like what's kind of the deal with cash? And kind of the 2 points I guess that come to mind is cash, if it's on the sideline, can be used for opportunity. Cash on the sideline could be used to build up an emergency fund or a cash reserve, which could be extremely helpful for you in a situation where you're not having to liquidate certain assets to cover it. So that was pretty much my rundown from the start. What do you guys think about that?
Well, what 2 things. One thing I automatically love about this segment is, Adrian, I imagine the person you were asking was a younger, right?
Yes.
By young, the people I were talking to are in their late 50s and 60s, right? So this person had to be younger than that. So I just love that aspect in general, because I think we did this on air. We may not have put this out there, but we talked about when Erik and I started at American Express Financial Advisors, which is now Ameriprise. We had a script for our initial meeting. And one of the things we would say is we would go through the cornerstones of financial planning. And the first one is cash and cash reserves. So I think as a building block, as you said, making sure you have the cash so you're prepared for an emergencies is really that first step, right? You've got to make sure that keeps you out of credit card liability, which tends to have higher interest rates. That also makes sure that, and the phrase I always use is that you're prepared for opportunities and emergencies. So on one hand, we were speaking to a client yesterday about their cash reserve and make sure they had enough for emergencies, but they're just moving for work now, and their opportunity may be to buy a property. And fortunately, they've got cash they can tap into for a down payment out there. So I love the question and the answer you gave.
Exactly. And just give a little bit more background on this person. This person just finally finished, like I believe a week ago, they finally paid off their student loans, and now they're seeing like some cash starting to like build up a little bit more. So now they basically just have all these questions around it, like what to do with it, what's the role it's going to play, like how should I start off with it? And I think that's where kind of ultimately like the question came up, where again, like we look at starting a cash reserve or emergency fund, have a little bit just for like opportunities, whatever it may be. So it does have a role other than just like sitting there, and obviously it's not really doing anything for you, but you just got to be strategic. Like feel like we're going to be saying this all episode, you just got to be strategic and as efficient as possible with this and plan so it can be utilized in the best possible way for you and your financial picture.
Yeah, and this isn't a question, but when you talk about being strategic, it just reminds me of very frequently, I've heard a lot of times people say when they come in for a meeting, I don't know if I had enough money to have an advisor. Have you guys encountered that as well, where people will say, and we hear this I've heard this literally from people with millions to people with a few 100,000. My answer is always the same, which is no matter how much you have, you planning how to do things more efficiently and strategically has a high value. And my argument is that the less you have, the more important it is. So if you truly feel like you don't have it, I don't have enough for a financial advisor, if that's what you think, well, you really need one, because making these steps done more efficiently and minimizing your taxes, if you don't think you have enough, it's that much more important, because if you have extra and you make one of these decisions incorrectly, you probably have enough to survive and still be okay for retirement. Where if you don't have enough and you make these decisions incorrectly, that may be the reason you run out of money early and need to cut down on your lifestyle, move, or that can force you to do financial moves you don't want to make.
Yeah,
Yeah, good.
Nope.
Well, listen, I'll just tack on one conversation I had on Monday. I think the answer to the question of how much cash or what's the purpose of cash is very much stage specific. So this was a fellow who's looking to retire pretty soon, he and his wife, and he has about 12-13% of his total portfolio in cash, thinking that's what he would need to weather a 4-year storm in the markets. And that would allow him then to not raid his portfolio in a down market. So I would say, again, in this case, his answer to the question or the purpose for cash, at least in his mind, is as a buffer, and I think as a behavioral aid, because it would help him feel better about allocating his portfolio in a more growth-oriented way if he knows he can withstand that potential of a 4-year downturn. So anyway, good question.
Yeah.
Can we move to number 3?
Yes, Eric, what do you have on the list?
All right. So I'm going to talk about one that I've been getting a lot lately, which has to do with the inherited IRA and the inherited Roth IRA rules. As people may know, the previous rule was allowed you to do a stretch over the life expectancy of the beneficiary. And as a result, while a spouse could take the IRA from their spouse and inherit the IRA from their spouse and just roll it into their own, non-spouse beneficiaries, with limited exceptions, would be required to make sure that got out normally by the time they were about 80 years old. Well, at the end of 2017, and beginning of 2018, we had a new rule in place. This rule is now the 10-year rule. And the 10-year rule is and does say that you need by December 31st of the year in which the 10th anniversary of the person from whom you inherited that IRA, that by December 31st of that year, you have to have that entirely removed from the IRA or the inherited IRA or from the inherited Roth IRA. Now, in the case of an inherited Roth IRA, that's not really a big issue because that doesn't have a tax consequence to you upon removal. Although going forward, now that it's in a taxable framework for you, you will have ongoing taxes related to taxable gains like short-term and long-term capital gains, as well as income and dividends off the portfolio. But where it really has an impact is on the side of the inherited IRA. In other words, because every dollar that comes out of that inherited IRA is going to be taxed on top of at the marginal rate, and stacked on top of the other sources of income that the person already has, and then consequently will fall in those upper tax rate regions, you might say, tax rate regions. So it's really valuable, since a lot of times, parents pass away, the recipients of these inherited IRAs oftentimes are their own children. Many times those children are in their own peak earning years. And if they're layering now, they have to either take it out all at once or, 1/10 at a time, or whatever distribution strategy they prefer. They really need to think carefully about, are there any of these upcoming 10 years in which we foresee that we are going to be at a peak earning year and hence in a peak bracket? Probably we don't want to take it out then. Or do we see, conversely, do we see some years in which we might, for a variety of reasons, be in a lull year? Maybe that's the year to take it out. By the way, if you were thinking about a sabbatical or something like that, or on something of that nature, that might be a year. As you look ahead to tax rate changes, that you might want to anticipate those tax rate changes. In fact, we have the current lower rates that were put into effect with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 under President Trump. Now, those are set to sunset at the end of 2025, and the Biden administration has been making certain sort of rumblings about possibly ending those rates sooner. So long and short of it is you need to be thinking really carefully now about where it's going to do the least damage across that 10-year window. That's how I'd answer that question.
Yeah, and you know what? As a saver, going back to what we said about where you put your money, if you are, here's the problem that this creates. If you're in your 50s and 60s, which are typically peak earning years, and let's just say you're in your 50s and 60s earning this higher income, so it makes sense to get the tax deduction and put it into a 401k. Well, if you're ahead of schedule or saving up for retirement, and now you're thinking about legacy planning and passing this money on, maybe that's a reason you put it into the Roth 401k versus the traditional, is because of the 10-year rule. So it's not only complicates things for the people inheriting the money, but also for the people that are putting money aside to then give to their children.
You make a great point, because for folks who might be wondering this, when Roshan and Adrian and I use this specialized software to evaluate whether or not Roth IRA conversions make sense under the old rule, we could use an assumption of the next generation having potentially a lower overall marginal income tax rate.
Yep.
But now when we crank up the assumed marginal income tax rate for the inheriting generation, then it shifts the calculus somewhat and moves it more in the direction of favorable transgenerational outcome or cross-generational outcome, to have more Roth IRA conversions done during the parents' lifetimes, even though it may not seem like sensible and rational within the scope of their own tax rates. When you're thinking about if there's going to be a meaningful surplus, it might, if your kids' welfare in this matter is of a concern for you, it makes more sense than to consider the conversion strategy than it used to.
That's
huge. Even if you're not concerned about your kids' welfare and just don't like paying extra in taxes, you can consider this one too.
Yeah,
exactly. And I'm actually going to jump into my next question, because Adrian, please go ahead. Did you have something to add?
I was just going to say, just how you structure your assets is just extremely important, because it not only impacts you, but it could impact your beneficiaries, your family, or whoever it may be down the line. So again, starting as early as possible and planning for this can make a huge difference, maybe for you or someone who your assets will go to in the future.
I completely agree. I was jumping to the next one because my question, Eric, what you touched on lines up directly with it. The next thing I've been having a lot of conversations on are Roth conversions. And we have an episode that Eric has been known to say multiple times that he thinks it's the most important one we've done, the one on Roth conversions. So for our listeners, first, I would encourage you to go there and check it out for further detail. But the question that we're getting is, should we be converting money that is currently in a traditional IRA over to a Roth IRA? And what makes this such a hot topic right now is the tax rates that are expected to go up in 2025, right?
2026, January 1st.
Yeah, so through 2025, you've got the lower rate. Starting January 2026, thank you, Eric, the rates go up. So we've got this window of 4 years where it might make sense to convert money to the Roth IRA. And just for an example of a typical client I deal with, if they're in the 24% bracket now, that 24% bracket is going to be the 28% bracket. So if we can do conversions at that current, and not only if they're in that bracket now, but if the expectation is for them to be in the same bracket throughout their retirement. Well, if we do these conversions now, we're getting a quick 4% savings that Erik, I believe I haven't heard it before you, tax arbitrage being the term you used with that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that I've had people ask questions about. And I'll say I also have brought up that question or that conversation with many clients, because particularly that window I mentioned, we've got this window where you can do these conversions of 4 years. But in addition to that, if you've got this money in regular taxable accounts, if you got money you can access to pay the tax versus paying it from the conversion, it just makes it a really powerful tool for you. The third piece where it makes a huge impact is, and gentlemen, tell me if you've encountered the same things. I've encountered clients who have enough money for retirement, and the majority of their retirement savings have been through 401k plans, which, if you know the history of 401ks, just makes a lot of sense that that's what's happening right now. But the majority of their savings are in 401k plans. Now, at age 72, they're forced to take money out for minimum distributions, but their expected minimum distributions are greater than the amount they need. So when we're looking at this Roth conversion, first, it's taking advantage of this tax arbitrage, and then it's lowering their future minimum distributions as well. And especially if they're forced to take out more than they need because the government wants their tax money, pay that a little bit earlier now at a lower bracket, and that might have a significant impact for you or your heirs. And then, Erik, you mentioned the 10-year rule earlier. Well, if it's in the Roth IRA, they've got to take it out, but they don't have to pay tax on it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So with planning across generations, this is a tremendous opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Hear, hear. Well, Adrian, how about question number 5?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm really excited to share this one. So the first one I got was kind of centered around cash, and this second was kind of centered around bonds. So I kind of got this question from like a random stranger. Honestly, I was out one night, and this was the type of person who like whips out their phone and like, oh, look at this stock that I invested in that's doing so well. Like, check this out. And then he said to me, well, it's not a complete stranger. I kind of know him a little bit, and he knows that I'm a wealth advisor. So he's like, look at this stock. Look how well I'm doing in this. And then his next follow-up question was like, why do people even invest in bonds? And that was the kind of the question like he directed towards me. And I kind of thought about it for a little bit, and I was kind of seeing where he came from and why he would say that. And the kind of answer, or kind of the conclusion like I came to is it's depending on your kind of situation. This was a younger guy, so he had a longer time horizon, where if this was maybe somebody that's older, that's about to retire soon, maybe they really can't take on the type of volatility that equities and stocks have, where they might look to something a little bit more stable that doesn't move as much as bonds. And also another consideration is the overall market environment. And I think also the interest rate aspect of it too plays into it, where interest rates just have been extremely low, and that's been a big impact. Where I guess he comes up with this like, what's the purpose of bonds like today? And it really boils down to your situation again. Again, they're also a way to diversify. That's another argument, where you could be diversified across all these like different equities, but bonds tend to have they call it an inverse correlation with stocks, where if some stocks are going down, bonds could be going up. So there was a bunch of different answers to it, but what do you guys kind of take from that?
Well, I'll give you a quick story that's very recent. The market got absolutely crushed on Monday. We're recording this on Wednesday, the 21st. That was Monday, the 19th. And the only thing that I had that was making money that day were the bonds. So, and going back to that's the diversifier, Adrian. So exactly what you said. And we, not that people typically aren't watching the markets as closely as we are. So we see that on a day-to-day basis, but that the fact that it was going up that day, that's just a one-day example. This can happen for a longer period of time than a day. When the markets pull back, you've got the bonds helping you go up. But to Erik's point about when he was talking about his client with, I believe it was 10 months of cash, or I'm sorry, 4 years of cash. He was managing his own behavior, right? Having those bonds as a diversifier may help you weather the storm when there's a big decline in the markets. And the fact that you have these bonds in the portfolio may be the reason you don't make a bad decision of selling at the bottom. So the diversifying aspect is what I'm touching on, but that can lead to behavioral finance implications as well, which would be helpful for you. So I like the answer you gave, although his argument with low interest rates in this current environment is a pretty strong one in terms of interest rates are low. The markets, the bond market, it's a tough time for bond markets when interest rates are this low.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, when you put it in perspective, you had at the early 1980s, some of our listeners will remember that the Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker and the Federal Reserve pushed short-term interest rates dramatically over the course of a very short period of time. And the 30-year Treasury bond was, if I recall correctly, at its peak point, paying about 18% interest per year for 30 years.
Yeah. And
since that time, it's come down. And now I think that if I'm not mistaken, the 10-year is about 1.5%, something like that. I mean, it's unimaginably changed over that period of time. So whereas once upon a time, bonds played a very useful role in terms of generating actual income along with the stability, I think, as you pointed out today, the interest-bearing argument for bonds, I think, is diminished to almost the point of zero. But at the same time, they still do provide that counter to the overall markets. If you look at a lot of the sectors of the stock markets around the world, I'm not just talking about the large cap U.S. stock market, but a lot of U.S. and international categories of stocks since mid-March of this year have been flat to down. Yeah. Some have been up, and tech has been up, but many have been flat to down. And whereas conversely, looking in aggregate at bonds, they've been up. So, the value of diversification has been demonstrated there just once again.
Yeah, agreed. And Erik, if you don't mind me jumping ahead of you with my last one, just because it flows with this conversation. Sure. We're talking about interest rates. Interest rates have come back down, similar to where they were in the fall. So I have had conversations with people about whether they should refinance their home. And in some cases, it's been a conversation of, should I refinance again? We got refinanced last year. Rates are a little bit lower than they are now. So should I refinance again? And the short answer for that for me is we definitely run the numbers to see if it makes sense. But in some cases, you've got to consider your closing costs just in general for refinancing, how long you'll stay in the home. Typically, I've heard the general rule being you want to get your closing costs back through lower payments in 18 to 24 months. But if you're going to be in the home longer, you can stretch it a little. So stealing Adrian's quote of being strategic and looking at your own personal situation, that definitely makes a difference. But it is worth looking into now, even if you just refinanced last year, because depending on when you did it last year, if you did it really early or really late last year, rates are probably lower for you right now than they were at the time.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And since you jumped and did your last question, can I jump to and do my last question? And we'll just let Erik wrap it up. So my first one was kind of centered around cash. My second one was centered around bonds. And this last one was, it was a little bit more of a complex one. And this will probably be a little bit tougher to answer. And this was around stocks. And this was another close friend of mine. And his question that he posed to me was, what should I prioritize, paying down debt or investing? And he kind of, with investing, means like in stocks. It was kind of where he was going from. And that one is a little bit tough because you have to kind of see like how much interest are you accumulating on this debt. If you're investing in stocks, you think you can outperform that interest that you're receiving on debt. So there's a lot of variables that go onto it. And I think Erik mentioned too in a previous podcast, like one of the best investments you can make other than in stocks is paying off that debt. Am I kind of quoting you right on that, Erik? I mean, again, it depends, but I thought that was a really interesting question.
Well, so yeah, I guess my response to that would be it depends in part on the nature of the debt. So if it's consumer debt, I would say absolutely. And I think also just as a general principle, the so high interest credit card debt, absolutely bang away at that because it's a guaranteed return. Let's say lower interest, let's say automobile debt or housing debt, then people will often say, well, gee, the rate is so low. Why don't I just, instead of diverting capital to pay off that debt, why don't I keep that invested in the markets? And I certainly can understand that from a mathematical standpoint. But I would also say, since we talk a fair amount on our podcast about behavioral finance, I think it does change your behavior if you think in terms of wherever possible, you're not going to operate on a debt basis, because what it does is it trains you, it teaches you to save for things that you know are expenses that are ahead of you, and as a result, it trains your appetite for things in such a way that in the long run better conforms with your own wherewithal to support whatever level of lifestyle it is that you're pursuing. With the house debt, I think it's a slightly different question, just because I recognize, wow, if people said, Erik, you mean to tell me I need to put every dollar together that I'll need before I buy that house? And I recognize in some cases and in some places, it would be an endless chase. You would be trying to save for the entirety of that home. Although I would say, there too, I have some people that are completely indifferent to when they buy into a bigger house, even late in their life or early in their retirement years. They're still thinking, I'm going to have a 30-year mortgage so I can, rather than a 15 or a 10-year, so that I can have a larger home or, a nicer home or whatever. Even there, I would probably say, you know what, there's a kind of freedom from getting out of debt or having the debt be smaller and manageable and being able to kind of attack it and get it out of the way. So I think what the liberty of being out of debt is an argument, I think, Adrian, that I would include in the conversation with your friend, not just the math of it, but the liberty inside.
I love this question because I get to disagree with Erik, and that's always the most fun.
Okay. All right.
So,
I love that.
So to start off with, agree completely with, if you've got high consumer debt, you do want to focus on paying it off. Agree with that. But the reason being is you've got to look at the interest rate. When Erik says it's a guaranteed return, if you've got a credit card and they're out there with like 23, 25% interest rates, if you're paying that much in interest, pay it off, right? So that's where I
would say the same thing. 18,
Agreed.
15, 12, 10. Get rid of it.
Agree with that. I was just picking the extremes, as you know I like to do. But yes, okay. High interest rate credit card debt, focus on paying it off. However, and Erik, you may, I think you'd agree with me, or you kind of touched on this, you've got to save at the same time. If you want to get out of debt forever, you got to build your cash reserves. With Adrian, that was your first question. So assuming you have nothing in cash, but you've got this big consumer debt, you've got to do both. You got to pay off the debt and save cash, but not invest in stocks yet. Adrian, that was your question about investing in stocks. Pay off the debt and save in cash. If your cash is built, and your debt is at a low interest rate, I'll frequently see people with 0% debt. Yes, I advocate for paying that debt off, but there I think you can make an argument for investing simultaneously. So once again, you've got enough cash, you have consumer debt, which we want you to get paid off, but it's at a low. You're one of these people that constantly rolls from 0% to 0% interest. And it's a headache to do, but if that's who you are and you're doing it anyway, then I think there's an opportunity there to invest in stocks. With the mortgage piece, though, Erik, is when I would argue the other side. And going back to everyone's situation is different.
Sure.
There are definitely clients I have and people based on their personality where I would advocate paying off their debt. There are other clients I have that I work with that look at it as strategic finance, and they say, I can get a 2.5% loan on my mortgage. I have the money to pay off this loan anytime I want in my investment account, but why would I pay off that loan when I can get it at 2.5% for 30 years right now? So that's where I understand what you're saying, where the freedom is, but I would say that depends on the individual, because for some people having a mortgage paid off really is freeing and mentally they just feel better. For other people, it's just a smart liability to have in their case. And for those people, they won't necessarily get that inherent freedom, so they don't have the need to pay it off. So why not take advantage of those low interest rates?
Okay, I'll accept your argument on the house. I just because I think there's so much, especially if you have a fixed rate. I think there's just so much you can say about if you have the money set aside and you can cover that. I'm not gonna go to the mat with you on that one. But I would say, if, let's say, coming back to the example of credit cards, even if you have 0% credit cards, you know what happens if interest rates rise again, or what happens if your credit changes, or what happens if
here's my answer. Using hypothetical easy math numbers, you've got $2,000 left over a month, and you can put all 2,000 to the credit card, or you can put 1,000 in investments and 1,000 to the credit card, right? My answer to you is there is market volatility, but that 1,000 you're putting in that investment account, if interest rates go up, you could pull it out to pay off the debt. The markets could be down and you could have gotten out of debt sooner. I'll concede that, because that's the flaw in that argument that I see. But that money's not gone, right? It's still there. You have access to it to pay off that debt.
Yeah, that's true. Again, depends on the makeup of the person.
Agreed.
And so what I've seen in some cases is that people set that aside, and then suddenly something occurs to them and they say, hey, I have a spending idea, and they go spend it.
Yeah.
And so
completely.
at that level, I say, just do yourself a favor. Yes, I would say, for example, contribute enough to your 401k to get matched.
Of course.
Because it's free money in that particular instance. Yes, do that. Before necessarily hyper, aggressively paying down that debt. But beyond getting that match and the free money, I love this, Roshan, that this is an area I think where you and I have a little different counsel to our clients. Is I'm going to counsel you pay off the debt, even if it's at that low level. But anyway, good that we've highlighted that.
And I'll tell you why I look at it. I view it as maximum flexibility. Right, it gives you the option. You pay that debt down. Yes, you can go charge it back up in a store, but if you're saving for a house, you can't charge your credit card for a down payment.
Well, okay,
right?
That's true. Maybe we should have an episode on credit card strategies for people in that particular position.
And I do want to give one disclaimer to be perfectly clear. If in general my only choices are pay off the credit card or invest, I would lean towards paying off the credit card. But what I'm looking at also, in addition to it, and why I'm pushing back on this, is I think you've got to know the person's goals. You've got to know the interest rates on the credit cards. You've got to know the person as well. So if they're, as you said, Eric, just putting money into an investment account today and taking it out tomorrow to spend, then yes, I would very much advocate them to just pay the card off in that scenario.
Okay. All right. So may I proceed with questions 8
Please,
and 9?
Yes.
All right. So one question that has come up in conversations probably 3 times in the last 10 days has had to do with the language within their estate plan to protect assets from either a divorcing, potentially a spouse of a child in the event of divorce, or an existing child whose outlook and values are significantly off from those of the parents with the asset. So what I explained to both of these clients is that the world of estate planning is enormously creative.
Yes.
And there are constant innovations that are being developed within that world. Often it takes a while for knowledge of those innovations to make their way through the estate planning community. And part of the reason for that is just there's so much that's going on in their world that just even with their ongoing continuing education, sometimes it's just hard to keep up. But and also sometimes there will be an innovation but you need to see whether it will hold up under, let's say, a court ruling in a state, or whether the IRS, through what's known as a private letter ruling, will validate the strategy and so forth. So it has to be tested sometimes. Once it's innovated, then tested, then disseminated, then it becomes more widely known. So when you go to an estate planning attorney to talk about your situation and what it is that you're wanting to accomplish, I want to encourage you to make sure you have conversations with probably 2 or 3, because it's conceivable, especially the newest ideas may not have made their way out to all 3 of those attorneys. And so you have the advantage of hearing from different attorneys about the ideas that are out there. In the case, for example, of one of my clients was really concerned. He says, I've got 4 kids. All 4 kids are married. 3 of the kids, I would say, are in good marriages, and we see how much their spouses line up with them and how much love there is. But in the case of the 4th child, while we don't in any way want to undermine that marriage, when we just look at how the spouse treats our daughter, first of all, it grieves us. And secondly, we're not confident that will endure forever. And on top of it, it's not just the differences between our daughter and this son-in-law, but also in terms of just their compatibility and what have you, and their behavior toward one another. But it's also the case that we're the side that is bringing wealth to the table, and the son-in-law is the one who's bringing the capacity to spend enormous amounts of money that he has never earned. So what can we do to protect what we want to have available not only to our daughter, but also to our grandchildren in that family, but not have it be susceptible to the spendthriftiness, if you will, of this son-in-law, and particularly if there is a divorce. So I'm not going to give you all of the estate planning solutions that are available for this, but there are several, and they're elegant, and they'll solve, because you're not the first parent who has faced that question about a son or daughter-in-law. So believe me, there are devices that are available for that. Now, switching over to the other one, it's the same thing in the case of your own children, where you have an asset that you want to pass, and you know that, in particular in the case of real estate, a vacation home, a farm, et cetera, they're not in an agreement about what to do with that. And one of those children might be pressuring the other child or children to dispose of that asset, even though it's treasured and important and can play a big contribution or make a big contribution to longer term family happiness. What do you do? Well, there again, there are strategies that estate planners can suggest to you that will help you balance the consideration of wanting to be fair with all your children and bless all your children equally with the resources that you'll leave to them, but at the same time, not put them in a position where there's going to be constant battling between them, constant guilting and pressuring and increasing division between your children because you left them with an unresolved problem that you forced them through their own negotiating skills or other sorts of things to resolve that question. It's your time now. You have the opportunity now to prevent that relational breakdown and rupture between your children by getting a good estate plan together that anticipates that and makes provision for it in advance.
Great point, Eric, and great. I actually have 2 clients with totally different situations that I spoke to this in the last week or 2 weeks that are need to do some estate planning for similar purposes. So I love when you said it's a very creative field, because as I told one of them yesterday, Adrian and I were together, that pretty much anything you can come up with, you can do to restrict your money after you pass away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Go ahead, finish
Well,
it
I
up.
was just going to say, what's the last one that you had on the list? But if you have something to add on this.
So the question I've had lately is about what should I do with this life insurance policy, and do I have enough or do I have too much? And here's the mistake that I would say I see most planners make. They use in their financial planning software a specified life expectancy. And then using that one life expectancy combination for, it's a single, then it's one life expectancy, or one life expectancy combination for a spouse or the two members of a marriage. Unfortunately, the answer that the software may come up for that, may provide for that particular age, may not be the same answer that it would give if you told it a different set of life expectancies for the two members of that marriage. And so if all of us when we were kids probably played that game called Battleship, right? Where you sit there and you say D7, miss, and then, okay, E4, hit. Well, it's the same sort of thing, I think, here, that if you can use the financial planning software, ask your advisor to use the financial planning software and test the sufficiency of your life insurance at different life expectancy combinations. If you do that, what I think you'll oftentimes find is that there are some really strong spots and life expectancy combinations, and then some really weak combinations that the financial planning software will miss if you don't go through that. There's a particular problem with some of these softwares, is that they'll say, hey, well, just you randomize the life expectancies. Okay, well, that'll give you a generalized answer, but it doesn't give you the answer that you need. What you're trying to do is remedy potential deep, deep weaknesses in a potential outcome that is in one of those combinations. So my counsel to you is ask your advisor to run different of these combinations, see where the weak spots are, and then see what the life insurance needs are at each of those spots. Doing this, for example, the other day with some of my clients, we found that their best solution would be one of the following two. Either have literally 5 tinier life insurance policies that drop off after the end of 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20, and then 25 respectively. Or instead of using life insurance at all, use something known as a deferred income annuity. I'll just call it, it's future income in a time capsule that opens up if one of those members of that marriage reaches a certain age. In this case, it would be 85. And so there are different ways of solving the weak spots in this. But long and short of it is, don't take a one-size-fits-all or answer about the amount of life insurance needed, and just take that at face value as if that's the one and only answer for all of the possible longevity expectations for the two of you.
Yeah. Another important point, that's something that with life insurance is an interesting one, because similar to estate planning, actually, people will typically do it and then not think about it for a decade at a time. But those needs do change over time. So it's important to revisit them. There are also different ways to calculate the life insurance need, and you should look at them both. The way I typically do it is we've got that range between needs and human life value, and we try to pick something that makes sense in between. That gives you a little bit of buffer if you're not going to look at it again for that decade or at these various times. But Erik, that's a great point. Adrian, do you have anything to add to the life insurance question?
I don't, but I think a lot of these questions and kind of Q&A answers that we've given today, there's a lot here and a lot to unpack, and each one of these can just be the starting point or a way for you to adjust your overall financial picture that will just pay dividends for you in the long run.
Yeah, before we hit record today, for all of our listeners, Adrian and Erik were discussing how this would be a 20-minute episode. And now we're almost an hour in, so I am sort of rushing us through a little bit. Gentlemen, anything to add?
But wait a
Yes.
second. We started with Sports Center.
We did.
So it's not like it's not like the podcast.
Sorry,
itself.
50 minutes of podcast, 10 minutes of Sports Center. I just want to recap this list of questions so that if anyone missed something or has follow-ups they'd like to ask us with a specific area, they can. We talked about how to best access your money in retirement, cash reserves and cash management strategies, the new inherited IRA rules, Roth conversions, the purpose of bonds in the portfolio, refinancing, paying off debt versus investing in stocks, estate planning to protect assets with various family situations, and then life insurance planning. So if anyone's got additional questions on these, feel free to reach out to us. Or if you have questions that we can use in a future episode, I think this is something we will be revisiting. Please feel free to ask. And finally, as I always say, thank you for joining us for another episode of the Retirement Lifestyle Show. Please like, subscribe, tell your friends and family about us, give us 5 stars, and we will be back next week for another episode.